Guys, why don't you show Tom where you're all coming in from? Throw in the chat whereabouts you're at so we can see what kind of audience we've got here. And then I'm going to give them a bit of a brief on who you guys are. We've got Vienna, Sweden, Slovenia, Australia. Oh, wow, Daniel, what time is it there? England, Austria, New York, Singapore, Bermuda, India, Ireland, Israel. Wow, as you can see, Tom, we've got quite a global group here. And I'll give you the skinny on these guys shortly as we kick off. And I've got a plan on probably the best use of time here on how we can get things flowing, as it were. Canada, Florida, yeah, quite to say totally. So people coming in from all different parts of the planet, all different time zones, and great to see you guys here. And as you know, I'm very excited for being able to have this conversation with Tom. It's been over a year since, probably more than a year now, a year and a half since we actually were together in person, Tom.
Yes.
And I love the fact you just never ever look any different. In fact, you're probably regressing.
No, I've looked this way since I've been 6 years old, Peter.
Doesn't surprise me. Oh, good. All right. Okay, it is 5:02. So let's respect everybody who showed up on time or early and throw a lead on this puppy. And what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to give you a brief introduction. Not that Tom needs one, but I'll introduce you guys to Tom. I'm also going to introduce Tom to you guys, so he has some sort of context for understanding the audience here. And I know that most of you have actually come across Tom's work through being referred through some of the stuff, and we've now built in an introduction to Tom into Module 1 for the EMF. So Tom, the incredible bunch of souls that are in front of us right now are the students and graduates from my 6-month elite coaching program called the Elite Mentorship Forum. And we hear the word coaching. In fact, let me just throw some light on the subject. There we go. We hear the word coaching thrown around in many different arenas here. And essentially, coaching is probably the wrong word. The entire outcome for EMF was designed back in 2015 to essentially raise people's consciousness. But if you lead to the market with that and you say, hey guys, I've got a 6-month program that's going to raise your consciousness, most people would look at you crazy and have no idea or understanding. Anyone relating to this, by the way? Yes, you all got sucker punched, but you're all here, which is great. I don't know, but and it's essentially the journey. We're not here to teach business skills. There's no business skills or anything like that, which most of my work originally centered on. It's all about improving oneself and ultimately choosing love over fear in ever more challenging circumstances by doing the inner work. And that's why I'm so proud to have these people on, because it is a journey. There is a lot of work to be done on that journey, and everybody here is a graduate of that program. And I've had the privilege of spending time with several of them in person, even though it is a virtual group, as it were. So we're currently about to launch EMF 9. We are going to be graduating soon EMF 8, and EMF 1s to 7 are already through the rabbit hut, as it were, and are with us today. And I've also invited EMF 8 and some 9 as well, just as a little surprise for them. But the very first module that I created around EMF, Tom, it's a series of 12 modules over 6 months, it was called Understanding How the World Really Works. And we essentially drilled down into understanding what you so eloquently described as essentially a virtual reality. And I went into a lot of sort of wave particle duality, and I didn't have the context for really putting together the model around it until I came across yourself. So now I've kind of introduced you to the people and the context that you have here. Guys, let me introduce you to Tom. And I first came across Tom on an interview online when I was walking my dogs, thinking, oh, I haven't heard from Bruce Lipton for a while. Let me do a YouTube search for Bruce. And this interview came up, which I shared with you guys earlier in the week for those that hadn't seen it, called Two Scientists See the Same Worldview. And I thought, well, I'll nose on that. And there was Bruce sat next to this other guy called Tom Campbell I'd never heard of. And Tom started speaking, and within a few minutes, I'm like, whoa, 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 who's this other guy? I like what he's saying. I like how it makes sense. And then I went on a Tom binge and started to get familiar with the model that I'm going to ask Tom to articulate for you guys today, which is essentially the my big toe, or theory of everything. And it was the first time in 40 plus years that I'd actually found something that laces tight on virtually everything that I'd been studying fragmentedly over the course of my, 31 years this year in personal growth. And there's a couple of things that I love about Tom. One is that one of his phrases is that if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. This wasn't a guy trying to push his model of the world onto other people, which, as you know, is a foundational tenet of EMF. We have no right to do that. We have only the right to be the example and the invitation. And that really resonated. And the other thing I loved about what Tom said was he said that you really want to be an open-minded skeptic. And he defined that very well. He said, if you're open-minded and you are not skeptical, we call that gullible. I think we can relate. If you are closed-minded, and just skeptical, then you're dogmatic, which is part of the problem we've seen in the traditional sciences for the last 100 years anyway. So I love the fact that he talks about, so it's not your truth if it's not your experience. So if it's not your experience, it's not your truth, and become an open-minded skeptic. So I took that to heart. And for the last X amount of years, I was trying to punch holes in the big toe, and I can't. Now, I'm not smart enough to be able to do it if I could, but I still remain open-minded and skeptical, as is Tom, who is also very open to, if the consistent data supports different outcomes, he's happy to go along with that, because that is the essence of true science. Not, hey, I've created a theory and now I'm going to ignore everything that doesn't fit my theory to try to promote how good I am. That's ego. So, Tom, on that note, the cross introductions are kind of there. I hope I did you a little bit of justice there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to start, if I may, just by if you give a little bit of an overview of your story, how you came into this a little bit, and then really the difference between a big toe and a little toe, and then outline kind of the parameters of where we are, and then we'll just see what rabbit hole that goes down and talk questions at the end. Does that sound fair?
That sounds fair.
Fabulous. Right, let's see if I can get you on full screen. Right. Does everybody see Tom in full screen now? Or is that just me? No, that's just me. Okay. Maria, do you have the ability to make a spotlight video?
Yeah.
Oh, no, hang on. That's me.
Yeah, upper right hand, it says view. If you click on view, then you have a choice between speaker view and gallery view. Gallery view, you see everybody. Speaker view, you see the big picture of who's speaking and little pictures of everybody else.
Oh, no, so that's individual, is it, for people to choose?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So everybody just click speaker view there, guys, and that should bring me up right now, and then Tom up front and center when he gets up. So I'm going to shut my mic off for a second, so enough of my voice. Tom, it gives me absolute great pleasure to give you the floor, and guys, give him some love.
Okay. Muted love. I love that. Yes, that's good. Well, let me tell you a little bit about myself as I'll try to follow Peter's outline here. Okay, I'm a physicist, and I started with what's called the operational definition of reality, and that is that if you can perform an operation on the thing, and measuring it is an operation, then it's real. If you can't perform any operations on the thing, then it's not real. So that's the view that science takes. And I was in graduate school probably about 2/3 of the way through my PhD work, and I started to meditate, TM, Transcendental Meditation. I got my mantra and I started off meditating, and it was a perfect fit for me. I had no trouble with it at all. In fact, about 3 months into it, I was able to debug my computer code in my mind much quicker and much more reliably than I could actually sitting looking at my computer code. I just bring up the picture of my code, like it prints out of a computer. I'd scroll through it, and all the lines that had problems would be red, and the other lines that didn't have problems would be black. And a red line would go shooting by, and I'd rewind, go back up, look at it, and I recognized all the lines since I wrote all that code. So then I'd go look at it in the physical, and sure enough, those lines that were red were the lines that had problems with the code. Now, you guys aren't old enough to remember the bad old days when computer code was done in punch cards. And in those days, we didn't have any of those nice debug software that is around now. And we didn't have any terminals that you could work from. It was get in your car, drop your cards off at the computer center, and if you were lucky, you'd get them back in a week. So if they bombed because you forgot to put a semicolon at the right place, then that was a week's worth of effort gone because of that bomb. So debugging was really important. And after I worked with this for a while, I was absolutely certain that I was indeed debugging code, physical code in my mind through non-physical means. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. That opened my mind. Now, this was something I couldn't measure. It obviously didn't have any physical components. It was non-physical. It was just mental, and it worked. So I threw out that operational definition and thought that reality is a lot bigger than I thought. And that began my open-mindedness on the subject. It wasn't too long after I got out of school that I had an opportunity to meet up with Bob Monroe. I don't know if you know Bob Monroe, but he wrote Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and Ultimate Journey. He was a guy that just had out-of-body things happen to him. He didn't want them to happen to him. He thought he was insane, but he played with them because they'd happened anyway and convinced himself that they were real, just like I convinced myself that this mind space had some real consequences. So I began working with Bob, and the deal was he was looking for some physicists and other scientists to help him run a lab and put his out-of-body experiences on the scientific map. He didn't like being the strange old guy who had, these odd things happen to him. He wanted it to be science. He wanted it to be real. So he was looking for some scientists. He was a wealthy guy, so he was looking for some scientists to study this. So I volunteered, and the deal was he'd teach me how to do out-of-body, then I would be a free physicist working in his lab. So that was the deal, and that's what happened. So within, it wasn't long, within 6 months or so, the year, I was able to go out of body on demand whenever I wanted to. And another fellow working with me, Dennis Menerick, he also was able to go out of body on demand. And what I did was, I was the physicist of the group. Dennis was a double E, electrical engineer. My job was to come up with, how does it work? Why does it work? A theory, something that would make it make sense. So it just wouldn't be strange, weird stuff. It would have some model behind it. So that's what I worked at. And for the next 35 years, I'm doing research in the non-physical. I'm trying to see how things work. I could go out of body. I could remote view. I could use my mind to heal. I could, see what was going on in another room, read numbers that are put on a blackboard, someplace else. So we did all this evidential things just to convince ourselves that it was real. Both Dennis and I came into it with the idea, I don't know if this stuff's real or not, but we'll find out. So we worked on evidential things just to convince ourselves that it was real. Well, I had lots and lots of evidence that it was real after 3 or 4 years of working about 15 to 20 hours a week with Bob Monroe. I had hundreds of hours that convinced me that what was going on was indeed real. So I began to collect all the facts I knew about consciousness from this research. So when I say research, what I mean is you do something like remote view or heal, and then you change a variable and you do it again. And then you change that variable again and you do it again. And you have to do this literally thousands of times through many, many variable changes. And eventually you get some idea of what affects what, how things work. And I had this list of facts of the non-physical. And one of the most obvious facts of this mental world that I was playing in was that consciousness was fundamental, that this physical reality was not fundamental. And the reason I knew that was because from the consciousness state, I could modify things in the physical reality. But from the physical reality, I could not modify consciousness. So the arrow of causality was from consciousness to the physical. That made consciousness the superset, the physical the subset. That made consciousness fundamental and the physical world a product of consciousness, some sort of subset of consciousness. And that worked in many ways. Can you change things in the physical? Can you modify what's going on in the physical? But it only works in that one direction. So that would be just an example of, after years and years of changing variables and doing the same experiments over and over again, I finally decided that I had enough to write a book about consciousness and what it was and how it worked. So I wrote the My Big Toe books, mainly a theory of consciousness, but I realized the physical was a subset. So I knew that there should be a way to derive science, derive physics from first principles from an understanding of consciousness. But it was a couple of years after I published these books, this trilogy of books, that I suddenly got the aha moment that let me see just how to do that. And I started deriving physics from the understanding of consciousness. And I was able to provide a logical derivation of quantum mechanics. Why is it that particles should best be modeled by probability distributions? Why is that? We know that's true, but from consciousness, you can derive why that has to be true, why it is true from very fundamental things. Why should the speed of light be a constant? No other speed is constant, irrelevant of the frame that it's in or the motion of that frame, but light is. It's the only thing like that. That's the big mystery behind relativity. If you make the assumption that light speed is constant, then you can pretty easily derive relativity just from that assumption. But science doesn't know why that's the case. Well, if you start with understanding consciousness, you can derive why that C is a constant. And a lot more details. There's lots and lots of small details that come along too. There's things that physics calls paradoxes. Paradoxes are things we know, things that we know because experiments tell us that this is the way the world is, but we just don't understand why it's that way. Those are paradoxes. And coming from the perspective of consciousness, you can logically derive solutions to every one of those paradoxes. So that was kind of the unity of kind of metaphysics and physics. Consciousness is fundamental. Understand consciousness and you can derive physics. Physics is a subset. And indeed, right now, I have several quantum physics experiments being done in a laboratory in Southern California. And these will just add another large measure of evidence to the theory that I have. Well, at least I hope they will. Experiment's not done yet, and you never know how it's going to come out until it's done. So I'm open to see how it comes out, but I'm expecting it to come out to verify my point of view. And what these experiments will do is they'll provide, if they work the way I think, they will provide some solid evidence for this being a virtual reality. That is, the physical reality is a subset of consciousness, a virtual reality. They will also provide a lot of strong evidence for the fact that consciousness is the computer. Consciousness is an information field. It's an information system. That shouldn't sound too odd to you, because what are you conscious of? Well, you're conscious of the data you collect through your five senses. That's what you're conscious of. So consciousness is an information system. Reality is based on information. An information-based reality can be called a virtual reality, a simulated reality, a computed reality. These are all just different terms for the same thing. Okay, so that's the fundamental idea behind it all. So what I did is I took all of the facts of consciousness that I derived and all of the facts of physics that I knew, and I started coming up with a model that would explain all of them. So I could explain physics, explain consciousness, explain the paranormal. It turns out the paranormal isn't para at all. It's just normal. It's a normal part of consciousness. It's, it's available to anyone and everyone. It's, when you have the bigger picture and the right perspective, then these things that seem magical, the paranormal things, turn out to just be focus of intent for the most part. Focus intent from the intuitive level, not from the intellectual level, but from the intuitive level. And there's lots of ways to practice to do that. Now, most of us have spent many years honing and developing our intellect, but most of us have spent very little time honing and developing our intuition. And it turns out that if you spend some serious time honing and developing that intuition, it's just as reliable and just as accurate as that intellect. Now, it's interesting, if you look at these two things side by side, you have an intellect that has a very strong process tool called logic. Very strong. This logic is precise. But that intellect almost never has enough information to make a logical, deductive conclusion. All of the important things in life, all of the things that are really significant, life-changing, are things that you don't have much information. You only have maybe 10% of the information. How many children should we have? Who should I marry? Should I take this job or that job? All of the things that are important in your life, you don't have enough information to make a deductive, logical choice. So we pretend that we make logical choices, but mostly we're just guessing, and we guess from our experience. So we have this precise, accurate tool called logic, but really, really ratty information. Now you go to the intuition, and it's just the opposite. The intuition has this kind of ratty, doesn't always work the way you want it to when you want it to process, called, intuition. That's being connected to your intuition. But it's got all the data that you could ever want. It's got all the information, and that information is clear and precise and available, and it's all sitting there, but you have to get it through this process tool called, intuition. So you see how we have the two opposites. One has all the information, but kind of a ratty tool to get it, and the other one has this wonderful tool, but ratty information. Well, when those two work together, you've got a whole person that lives in a much larger reality with a lot bigger decision space in that reality. So that's really where we need to go. We need to spend some time developing that intuitive space rather than just developing our intellectual and logical space. And when we do, there's so much more information out there. lots of information. And where this information comes from is that in order to run this virtual reality, in order to compute this virtual reality, the system needs, and when I say system, we're talking about another subset of consciousness. Consciousness can configure itself into different forms. One form is as a computer. That's, the rendering engine for this virtual reality. Another part is us. We're individuated units of consciousness, just a piece of that consciousness. So that's another thing that a way that it can organize itself. So we have this larger consciousness system. It's an information system, and it has created this virtual reality for us to learn in. If you have an information system, information systems evolve. In other words, they continue on by lowering entropy. If you have all the bits in an information system and they're all random, there is no information in the system. Random bits have no information. You start ordering those bits, making that order mean something. That order is maybe a symbol or has some other meaning to it. Then that is information. So ordering the random bits creates information. An information system evolves by creating more and more useful information. It does that by ordering. When you take disorder and move it to order, that's a measure of entropy. Entropy is a measure actually of disorder. So an information system evolves by lowering its entropy. Okay? Now, that's what it does. It has to create more significant, more meaningful structures. That means more organization, ways of connecting, ways of doing things. So it starts out as a monolithic consciousness. Then it breaks itself into pieces that we call us, individuated units of consciousness, because consciousness, of course, has free will. And if you want to ask me questions later, you can ask me these details. But if I tell you all the details now, we'll be here 2 or 3 hours. And I don't know that everybody wants to sit here and listen to me that long. I think it'd be better if I wind up early and you get to ask questions. So anyhow, you can ask me about that if you like later. I'll tell you. So as it turns out in this consciousness system, that the way it can best lower entropy is by caring, by cooperating, by having empathy. Because this is a social system. It's the larger conscious system, and it's lots and lots of individuated units of consciousness. And we together, because we all have free will choices, we together form a social system. Now, the system had to learn from us that the way to optimize a social system is through cooperation. But I can give you just a real short little, a little story, I guess, a little, I don't know what to call it. Anyway, let me just do it and I won't have to call it anything. I will give you a little bit of why that makes sense. So think of a social system. And let's say that we have 2 subsets of this social system, and both subsets are identical. Same, let's say, number of consciousnesses, same number of people, if we want to talk about people. So they each have, say, 10,000 people. They each have the same resources. The 10,000 people are kind of equivalent people. It's not that one has smart people and the other only has dumb people. They all have the same sort of people. So 2 equivalent systems. So we take the first system is system A, and we let that be the system based on fear. And we take the second system, B, and that'll be the system based on love. Now I just break these 2 sides out and I call them the fear side and the love side. In the fear side, we're going to take that group and let them go with their resources and their people and just see what they make of it. We're going to come back maybe a decade or a century later and see what they've done with themselves. Okay, on the fear side, you have some attributes of fear that create certain kind of social issues. Like one, there's no trust. If you're very fearful, then you're afraid that other people are going to take advantage of you. So you really don't trust anybody but yourself. Well, the second part of being on the fear side is that you're very self-centered, because fear is all about you. Fear is about you and your safety and what you want and what you need, and it's centered on you. So if there's only a certain amount of resources, what we find over on the fear side is that people grab the resources and hold on to them the best they can. And there's competition for those resources because everybody wants them, and it's all about them. It's not about sharing and cooperation. It's about them. So people try to own as much of the resources as possible. And eventually that society turns out to have about 5% of the people owning 95% of the resources, and just a few people on the top telling everybody else what to do and how to think, and the nature of way reality works. So that sounds kind of where we live. That's like good old planet Earth, right? That's us. So we kind of live in a fear-based culture, a fear-based society. And that's the way the fear-based side always optimizes itself. Well, it's not optimal at all. It's very suboptimal. Now let's look at the love side. Over on the love side, we have caring. It's about other. That's what love is. It's about other, not about self. It's about compassion. It's about optimizing the resources for everybody. So everybody there wants everybody else to have it as much the way they want it as possible. So it's everybody's trying to make a better place for everyone else. If we look at that side and we come back, a century later or whatever, what we find is that everybody is cooperating, everybody's sharing. On that love side, when somebody comes up with a new idea, some brilliant invention or whatever, they immediately want to share it so everybody can use it. On the fear side, somebody comes up with a new idea, they want to keep it close to the vest because they're going to be able to make that good for them. They're going to be able to sell it or make money on it or somehow make their life better, so they are more likely to win the competition with others. So it doesn't get shared. It gets used for whatever profit can be squeezed out of it. Now, so we look over on the love side and we realize that the people there have the maximum personal freedom. Because if anybody there says, gee, I'm not happy doing brain surgery every day, I want to be a poet. Well, all the rest of the people in that society try to reconfigure in a way to make that available to that person. You see, because poetry is a good thing too, as well as brain surgery. That's useful. So if somebody wants to do art, if somebody wants to do science, if somebody wants to do engineering, if somebody just wants to raise children, that's okay if that's what you want to do. So the system will always try to reconfigure to make everybody's world as full of potential and full of satisfaction as possible. How can we rearrange this so that everybody gets to do what they want, how they want, when they want, as far as that is available? So the resources are shared. So that's why we come to the conclusion that an information system, as it evolves toward becoming love. You see, so naturally we have this larger consciousness system. It's an information system, and it is evolving toward becoming love because that's the optimal system. Now, that larger conscious system didn't necessarily know all that in the beginning. And in the very beginning, it had these individuated units of consciousness, and it said, all right, you IUOCs, here's what we're going to do today. Everybody's going to be nice to each other, right? And of course, these little IUOCs with free will said, nah, not us. We got something else we'd rather do. And that didn't work out. So the system started to get a little pushy. Yes, you are going to do this. You must pay attention and do what I tell you. And the little IUCs with free will said, no, thanks, Pops. We're out of here. We have other things on our mind. And the system had to, through its own trial and error of trying to be forceful, trying to be demanding, trying to threaten, trying to force and control, it realized none of that worked. All of that was counterproductive. It just made things worse. And it finally realized that the way to interact in a social system that's helpful for everybody, that actually lowers entropy, is by caring, supporting. You see, letting people have to come to growing up on their own. You can't make somebody grow up. They have to grow up on their own from the inside out. You can't bully them into growing up. All it does, it makes it harder for them to grow up when you try to bully them. So the system learned this, and the system became a very loving, caring system. And we were kind of the individual units of consciousness that taught it, that lesson. And now we have to learn it as we interact with each other. And because we're consciousness, we communicate. That's what consciousness does. It sends messages back and forth. Well, here was all these individuated units of consciousness, like in the great big chat room, sharing messages back and forth, but nobody's growing up much because there aren't any real consequences to anything. And the system says, oh, I can help by creating a reality with consequences. In other words, with a rule set that defines things, with a context that creates meaning and strategy. So it starts this virtual reality that we call the physical universe. It has some initial conditions, a rule set, punches the run button, and lets this virtual reality evolve. Eventually, it evolves into our physical reality. It's just a virtual reality. It's an entropy reduction trainer for individuated units of consciousness. And that's what we're doing here. So now we have this idea that, why are we here? We're here to grow up. We're here to become love. We're here to learn how to care, how to give, how to get rid of our self-centeredness. And instead of saying, what's in it for me? It's like, how can I help? You see? So that gives us the other side of this theory. One side is physics. Okay, it does better physics. So we can rewrite physics and rewrite biology and rewrite almost all of science, neuroscience, psychology. We can rewrite that as we solve all these paradoxes. Now we have something that makes really good sense. So yay for science, but also yay for philosophy, yay for theology, yay for epistemology, ontology, cosmology, because all of these mysteries start to fall out with logical understandings of them. And yay for the paranormal, because now it's just normal. It's not para, because we understand it. We understand how it works, why it sometimes doesn't work. We understand, all about it. It's just an attribute of consciousness. It's the way consciousness works. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I've tried to make a real fast sweep over the whole thing so you'd get both sides of it. You'd get the philosophy side, there was this war in philosophy going on since before Plato, where you had the idealists versus the realists. And that argument went on in philosophy right up until we got to 1920s, the double slit experiment. And that basically solved that. And the idealists were the ones that won. The realists basically said, what you see is what you get. There isn't anything else. That's it. Done. So that was basically materialism and determinism. That was where the realists went. The idealist says, well, there's more to this life than what you see. It's not just this physical stuff. That's not all there is to it. There's other components to us besides that. And these other components are non-physical. That puts them in the ideal. Okay, so this argument raged and raged and raged. Well, of course, that argument is a done deal now. It's the idealists who win. It's not just a physical deterministic place. And quantum physics pretty much demonstrated that materialism doesn't work in science. It's bad science. It doesn't work. Physicists used to see electrons as little chunks of matter with a charge. And that's what, if you're as old as I am, that's what you were taught when you were in school, right? You have this little chunk of matter and has a charge, and these electrons, they zip around the nucleus with their little charge and orbits and so on. That's what you learn. Well, all of that is nonsense. It's not like that. And if you try to do physics with little chunks of matter with a charge, you can't get anything right. All the experiments turn out different than what you predict they will. But if you think of the electron as a point with the attributes of mass and the attribute of charge, now you can get right answers. You can predict things that actually happen when they smash particles together. So what is a point with attributes of mass and charge? Well, that is a simulation of an electron. When you simulate an electron in a computer, you make it a point and give it attributes of mass and charge. That's matter, or that's electron as information, as opposed to electron with mass and charge. So that's where physics has gone in the last 100 years, basically since quantum physics started in the 1920s. So now we're in the 2020s, and it's continued to go that way. And we know that materialism is not the right answer. That when physics has some very basic things that it derives everything else from. And those things are like space, time, charge, mass, probably a couple of other, spin, gravity. There's some basic things. Time, I don't know if I said time or not, but time. All those things are basic things, and all the rest of physics is just how those things interact with each other. That's all physics is. But yet, if you ask any physicist, well, what is time? What is space? Where does time come from? Where does charge come from? Where does mass come from? They have no idea. So all the fundamentals of physics just are. They just are. We accept them that they are, and we don't have any causality for them whatsoever. They're beyond causality. So we could say that physics is based on mysticism. It's based on things just being, because they are. Don't ask me why or how, they just are, you see. Whereas when you have this understanding of reality being a virtual reality, then you know exactly what all those things are. They're information. Then that information acts according to a rule set. That rule set is what we call our physics and our chemistry, our science. So in any case, that gives you a little bit of the science side, a little bit of the philosophical side. They're both important. They both have their place. As far as individual growth, it's that soft side that's probably a lot more important than the physics side. The physics side is important because one day it's going to be the thing that helps all the rest of us grow up And if these ideas ever make it to the mainstream, it will be the physics side that puts us into the mainstream. But the soft side is important because that's all about us and our life and our relationships and interacting with each other. That's about finding peace, finding happiness, finding satisfaction in a world that is anything but peaceful. You know, we're in this world and it looks like it's a horrible place to live. You know, we have so much greed and so much self-centeredness and so many people trying very hard to take advantage of everybody else. It's full of grabby people who want more and more for them, caring very little for others. And that makes this a pretty tough place to live. But if you have the right perspective, that doesn't pull you down. You can still live here and be full of joy, full of happiness, full of satisfaction, and life is good because you'll understand that negative stuff, that's just the way people are. And they all have to grow up on their own, in their own way, their own time, at their own speed, and you just accept them. That's the way they are. They're struggling, doing the best they can with what they came in with, and they'll grow up one day, and you have compassion for them. You have a lot of compassion for them because they are not happy people. They're struggling. They're unhappy. They are not satisfied. They're miserable people, and they have to learn. And pain is one of the things that points us in a better direction. You know, if you feel enough of that pain, you stop doing what you're doing and start doing something else. So you can live in a place that's a tough place and still be happy in it, still find joy in it. It is what it is. It's just what it needs to be. This world we live in is a very accurate representation of us, of what I call the quality of consciousness, or having a high quality of consciousness is having a low entropy consciousness, as we talked about entropy earlier. So we have to learn to accept things as they are, change what we can change, not get upset over what we can't change, and know the difference between what we can change and what we can't. You know, it is a great life. So I'll let it open to questions. I've skimmed over the top. I've left lots and lots of things like free will and, you know, stuff that I didn't get into, because I'll let you ask questions if you need that. So that took up about most of the first hour, and hopefully the second hour will just be open to questions.
Yeah, probably the next 5 hours, to be fair. No, it's good. Yeah. But no, Tom, thank you for that. Succinct, profound as usual. And yeah, we do have some questions, some that came in earlier, some of the notes that I've been making as you've been talking. And yeah, I want to try to really add as much value as I know you do, Tom, to the audience here. So one of the things that I want to kind of dive straight into, because once you have context for certain things, it demystifies and helps you lower your fear or levels of uncertainty around it. One of the things that the whole My Big Toe philosophy has done, which ties in beautifully with Einstein's question, saying that the most powerful question you can ask is, do you live in a friendly or hostile universe? Because that is both of those subsets side by side, pretty much. And for many people, the number one I guess reconcilable fear that many people have is the perception of death. And if you don't have a context for that, it can be somewhat debilitating and a slippery slope down into fear at certain levels, even if you're working on your consciousness. So I've always said that, death is not the opposite of life, it's the opposite of birth. But are you able to, having the experience you have, maybe give some context around that could help some people here? Would that be a useful question, guys?
Yeah. Okay, sure. I'd be glad to talk to that. A lot of people for a lot of years have had this question, what happens when I die, right? And fortunately, this theory will tell you exactly what happens when you die. As it turned out, it is indeed a theory of everything. So that's an honest question. There are no questions that are are off the table. So anyway, you'll be happy to know that you are not your body. Your body is an avatar. You are consciousness. You're an individuated unit of consciousness. And as such, you are immortal. Death is what happens in the virtual reality. Very much like the virtual reality games you play. When you play your virtual reality games, your characters often die and they get resurrected in some way. In World of Warcraft, they die and you end up in the graveyard and you have to run all the way back to your character and pick up all your magical items and all your stuff, and then you get back into the game again. Other games, you just pick up and start another character, maybe when yours dies. But in any case, characters die. That's the virtual reality. Death happens in virtual realities. In consciousness, death doesn't happen. So here's first the bigger model, then I'll give you a specific. I'll just walk through your experience when you die. And we'll go through that whole experience, but a little bigger picture first. I talked about the virtual reality game. We'll use that as a good metaphor in a virtual reality game. So let's take a game. My history with virtual reality goes back so far that the games I mentioned probably aren't even still going anymore. I don't know. I go way back in time because I've not been a player of virtual reality games, but my children were all players of virtual reality games, particularly my sons. And even my daughters, they love VR games and spend a lot of time at them. So I sat by their elbow and I watched them play. So I know a little bit about them, even though they're after my time. So anyway, this World of Warcraft game, which is one both my sons played a whole lot of, they played elves and they played necromancers and they played barbarians and all sorts of different characters. Magic users. And from the elf's perspective, the elf cannot find the server that serves up that reality in its reality. In other words, the server, the computer that serves World of Warcraft is not located inside World of Warcraft, right? The server that computes World of Warcraft has to be outside of the virtual reality it creates. Simple logic, right? Third grade logic. Well, that means that the server has to be non-physical from the perspective of the elf. So that server is non-physical from the elf's viewpoint. Now, the elf is just a pretty picture on a screen. The consciousness behind that elf is the player. The player makes all the choices for that elf. And from the elf's perspective, that player has to be non-physical. And what's more, that non-physical player and that non-physical computer both have to be in the same reality, because the player and the computer is really what's going on in that game. It's a player talking to a computer and a computer talking to that player. The player says, make my elf run. And it tells the computer draws the picture of the elf running, and that has consequences. The computer shows the consequences and then asks the player, now what do you want to do? You see, so it's just a player to computer, computer to player is what's happening. And that conversation can't take place across different reality frames. It has to be in the same reality. So here we are. Our body is the avatar, like the elf. The computer has to be non-physical to us. And the player, our consciousness, has to be non-physical to us. So now who do you identify with? Do you identify as the elf or do you identify as the player? Well, we tend to identify ourselves as the elf. That's our bodies. We think, oh, that's me, that's my body. But actually, that's just a virtual body. And who you really are is your consciousness. So when that elf dies, you, the consciousness, don't die. The player doesn't die when the avatar dies. The player goes on, gets another player, or rehabilitates that one. So that's the basic model of death in this model. It's just a virtual death. It's not an actual death. So here's what happens from the perspective of that avatar. Well, I have one other thing, I guess, at the higher level to say, and that is that, okay, a piece of the larger consciousness system is the individual, the individuated unit of consciousness. And you can just think, not so much that you take a big knife and cut out a chunk of the larger conscious system and set it aside and say, that's an IUOC, an individuated unit of consciousness, but more like the system just takes a part of itself and partitions off a piece of that, and it calls that an individuated unit of consciousness, gives it its own free will choices. So it's a subset of the larger consciousness system. Now, the individuated unit of consciousness also creates a subset of itself, and that subset is what logs on to make choices for the avatar. I call that a free will awareness unit. So we have an individuated unit of consciousness, partitions off a piece of itself, just the piece that represents its quality, its entropy, how low its entropy is, its quality of consciousness, no memory. And it takes that, then that free will awareness unit, and that's what logs on to your body avatar. Okay. So as far as that free will awareness unit goes, that avatar's experience is its experience. As far as that free will awareness unit knows, it has no other experience except that avatar's experience, because it didn't come with experience, it just came with quality. So it identifies with that avatar and thinks it is that avatar because all of its experience is the experience of the avatar. It's making the choices for that avatar. So that's why you identify so much with your body.